ठीक है, ये न्यू टॉपिक के फॉर्म में कर लेंगे, शैडो प्राइसिंग। ठीक है, करंट ईयर वाले क्वेश्चन में है, सो एडेड क्वेश्चन के फॉर्म में। So different parts of it, obviously one is the meaning part, then utility or need for use of shadow price, then determination of shadow price, determination of shadow price, and finally it will be difficulty or limitation. Difficulty of obviously determining shadow price. ठीक है, डिफरेंट जो पार्ट्स समझ जाएंगे उसमें। ऑब्वियसली फॉर एनी क्वेश्चन लेटर से 15 और 20 मार्क्स का जो क्वेश्चन आ रखा था, दिस वाज द क्वेश्चन इन 2018। सो मीनिंग पार्ट ऑफ इट, व्हाट इज द कंसेप्ट ऑफ शैडो प्राइस एंड व्हाट इज द यूटिलिटी ऑफ दैट कंसेप्ट, हाउ वी डिटरमाइन द शैडो प्राइस एंड व्हाट आर द डिफिकल्टीज इन डिटरमाइनिंग द शैडो प्राइस। बेसिकली इट इज़ यूज्ड इन एनी पब्लिक प्रोजेक्ट इवैल्यूएशन। अगर कोई पब्लिक प्रोजेक्ट है तो उस पब्लिक प्रोजेक्ट का एक्चुअल में कॉस्ट क्या है, उस कॉस्ट को रिफ्लेक्ट करने के लिए वी आर बेसिकली यूजिंग दी शैडो प्राइस, बिकॉज डेवलपिंग इकोनॉमीज आर बेसिकली कैरेक्टराइज्ड बाय वेरियस फॉर्म ऑफ इम्परफेक्शन। सो इम्परफेक्शन की वजह से भी जो एक्चुअल का मार्केट प्राइस होता है वो एक्चुअल में उसकी स्कैर्सिटी को इंडिकेट नहीं कर रहा होता है। तो प्राइस जो ट्रू इंट्रिंसिक वैल्यू है किसी फैक्टर ऑफ प्रोडक्शन का, वो रिफ्लेक्ट नहीं हो रहा। Because of that basically we are using that shadow price. तो फर्स्ट पार्ट बेसिकली उसका मीनिंग है, आफ्टर दैट द यूटिलिटी कंसेप्ट और नीड। फर्स्ट डेफिनेशन लिखिएगा, वहां से क्लियर हो जाएगा हाउ इट हैज बीन डिफाइंड। इन अंडर डेवलप्ड कंट्रीज फॉर प्रोजेक्ट इवैल्यूएशन, in underdeveloped countries for project evaluation and programming, for project evaluation and programming, the distribution of factors and programming the distribution of factors on the basis of market price, on the basis of market price is imperfect, on the basis of market price is imperfect, because there exist fundamental disequilibrium, there exists fundamental disequilibrium which are reflected in fundamental disequilibrium which are reflected in mass underemployment, which are reflected in mass underemployment, mass underemployment at existing wage, mass underemployment at existing wage, after comma, in the deficiency of fund or shortage of fund, in the deficiency of fund at existing interest rate, at existing interest rate, and scarcity of foreign exchange, and scarcity of foreign exchange, scarcity of foreign exchange at existing exchange rate, existing exchange rate. In such situation, the equilibrium level of wage, the equilibrium level of wage and equilibrium interest rate, and equilibrium interest rate and equilibrium exchange rate, and equilibrium exchange rate, equilibrium exchange rate differs from their market rate, differs from their market rate, differs from their market rate. ठीक है, पहले इंट्रोडक्टरी पार्ट आप समझ लेना. व्हाट इज द प्रॉब्लम इन्वॉल्व इन इम्परफेक्ट कंपटीशन. व्हेन वी टॉक अबाउट लेबर मार्केट, इन लेबर मार्केट लेबर डिमांड and labor supply, their intersection basically determine the wage rate. This is equilibrium wage rate. But if we find that at any given wage rate there is unemployment in the developing countries, so if there is unemployment, it means the existing wage rate is higher. So at that higher wage rate labor demand is less and labor supply is more, and because of that there is unemployment. So if we find that there is unemployment in the underdeveloped countries, it means the market wage rate which is existing is not equilibrium wage rate, because at equilibrium labor demand is equal to labor supply. Similarly, if we find that at any given rate of interest, at any given rate of interest there is shortage of capital available, firms want to borrow more but there is less capital available. So if I draw the same diagram for demand for capital, so this is the demand or this is the supply, so their intersection will determine the equilibrium rate of interest. But if we find that there is shortage, then shortage इसका मतलब है गवर्नमेंट ने एडमिनिस्टर करते हुए रेट ऑफ इंटरेस्ट को लोअर रखा है, बट एट दैट लो रेट ऑफ इंटरेस्ट सप्लाई ऑफ कैपिटल इज लेस एंड डिमांड फॉर कैपिटल इज more, so we find basically a shortage of capital. Similar problem arises in terms of rate of exchange. This is the demand for foreign currency, this is supply of foreign currency, this will be the market equilibrium exchange rate. But if we find that there is a shortage of foreign exchange rate, means government has deliberately kept exchange rate lower. तो जो मार्केट में प्रिवेल कर रहा है exchange rate या rate of interest और wage, it is not the equilibrium value. But जो हम जब when you undertake any project, you will be hiring labor at this wage, but is this wage reflect the equilibrium wage rate? No. Is this rate of interest reflecting the equilibrium rate of interest? Again no. So जब आप प्रोजेक्ट को इवेलुएट करते हैं तो जो रेट ऑफ इंटरेस्ट या वेज रेट ले रहे हैं वो मार्केट का इक्विलिब्रियम वेज रेट नहीं है. सो टू ओवरकम दैट प्रॉब्लम शैडो प्राइस हैज बीन सजेस्टेड. तो शैडो प्राइस बेसिकली क्या होगा? शैडो प्राइस विल बी टेकिंग इनटू अकाउंट द इम्परफेक्शन इन्वॉल्व्ड इन द, यू आर नॉट यूजिंग दिस वेज रेट एट फेस वैल्यू. You know that this wage rate is higher than what? Equilibrium. This rate of interest is lower than equilibrium value, and that exchange rate is also lower than the इक्विलिब्रियम वैल्यू ऐड करना उसमें। टू ओवरकम these difficulties, shadow price or accounting price has been suggested. Shadow price or accounting price has been suggested. Next paragraph. Shadow prices reflect intrinsic or true value of intrinsic or true values of factors or products full stop. G. Tinbergen, 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 J. Tinbergen defined shadow price as prices indicating the intrinsic or true value of a factor or product, in the sense of equilibrium price, full stop. These prices may be different for different time period. These prices may be different for different time period, as well as geographically separated areas, and various occupations, they may deviate from market prices, full stop. Tinbergen defined shadow price as those that correspond to intrinsic values and that would prevail if पॉइंट के फॉर्म लिखेंगे. नंबर 1, if the investment pattern under discussion, if first the investment pattern under discussion, investment pattern under discussion were actually carried out, were actually carried out, actually carried out. Second, equilibrium existed on the markets, equilibrium existed on the markets, equilibrium existed in the markets of, in the markets of labor capital, labor capital, foreign exchange, etc. labor capital, foreign exchange, etc. Remember, when you use the concept of shadow price, suppose for example if a public project has to be undertaken, you have to evaluate the cost and benefit. But how to determine the cost? In order to implement that project, government or private player require that capital. But if they are able to borrow that capital from the banks at government administered rate of interest, so is this rate of interest exactly reflecting the scarcity of capital? जो रेट ऑफ इंटरेस्ट आप चार्ज कर रहे हैं या यूज कर रहे हैं, क्या वो उस फैक्टर के स्केर्सिटी को शो कर रहा है? ये तो गवर्नमेंट एडमिनिस्ट्रेड रेट ऑफ इंटरेस्ट हो गया. if this market would have been competitive, the rate of interest would have been higher. So it is deliberately kept at a lower level due to government policies. Now similarly, if you are using that labor, the wages given to labor, is it reflecting the market price? No, the market price is lower, but the wages given by you is higher. So basically, when you evaluate a project, in order to know the intrinsic value, that means वो reflect होना चाहिए जो wage आप use कर रहे हैं. Let us say for example, if we have to calculate irrigation project, तो irrigation project में अगर गवर्नमेंट की तरफ से कोई रिसोर्स फ्री में मिल रहा है, तो अकाउंटिंग प्रैक्टिस के अंदर क्या करेंगे हम? अकाउंटिंग प्रैक्टिस में एक्चुअल में हम उसके ट्रू कॉस्ट को कैलकुलेट करते हैं. मतलब ट्रू कॉस्ट करने का मतलब है एक्सप्लिसिट एज वेल एज इम्प्लिसिट कॉस्ट. यू यूज अकाउंटिंग कॉस्ट एज वेल एज द इकोनॉमिक कॉस्ट. तो इकोनॉमिक कॉस्ट बेसिकली वेदर ये इंपॉर्टेंट नहीं होता कि किस प्राइस पे हमने एक्चुअल में उसको बाई किया है. इंपॉर्टेंट है कि किस प्राइस पे वो बाई होता है इफ मार्केट वुड हैव बीन competitive. So in a competitive market, the wages are determined by the intersection of demand supply. In a competitive capital market, it is determined by intersection of labor demand and supply. In a competitive foreign exchange market, it is again determined by this. But most of the underdeveloped countries are not competitive. Since they are not competitive, therefore in those markets, the prices are not reflecting the true intrinsic value. So for reflecting the true intrinsic value, we use the shadow price. नेक्स्ट पैराग्राफ में द प्राइस मैकेनिज्म ऑपरेट्स इम्परफेक्टली. द प्राइस मैकेनिज्म ऑपरेट्स इम्परफेक्टली. द प्राइस मैकेनिज्म ऑपरेट्स इम्परफेक्टली इन underdeveloped countries. The price mechanism operates imperfectly in underdeveloped countries. Full stop. Market prices do not correctly reflect relative scarcity. Market prices do not correctly reflect relative scarcity, benefits and cost. This is because Perfect competition is entirely absent. Perfect competition is entirely absent. Full stop. Structural changes do not respond to price changes. Structural changes do not respond to price changes. After comma, institutional factors distort the existence of equilibrium in product market, labor market, capital market and foreign exchange market. इंस्टीट्यूशनल फैक्टर्स का मतलब है यहाँ पे फॉर एग्जांपल गवर्नमेंट मिनिमम वेज, administered rate of interest, fixed exchange rate system. These are the institutional mechanisms. So those institutional mechanisms are inhibiting market prices to be reflected by the demand and supply intersection. As a result, prices fail to reflect. As a result, prices fail to reflect. Prices fail to reflect and transmit. Prices fail to reflect and transmit. Reflect and transmit the direct and indirect influence. The direct and indirect influence on the supply side. On the supply side and demand side. On the supply side and the demand side. Full stop. Markets are not in equilibrium due to structural rigidities. Markets are not in equilibrium due to structural rigidities. Due to structural rigidities. Thus, market prices particularly those of factor of production, after comma, form a very imperfect guide, to resource allocation, in underdeveloped economies. Because there exists fundamental disequilibrium. In various markets. Remember, when you have to determine any particular project. So for project evaluation you have to determine the cost. Now if a firm finds that whether to use more labor or whether to use more capital, it all depend upon at what wage rate you can hire labor, at what rate of interest you can borrow capital. But if government deliberately keep rate of interest lower administered and keep wages higher, then what will be the outcome here? Firm will tend to use more capital because capital is available at a cheaper rate, cheaper than what is required by the market, and labor is available at a higher wage what is required by the market. So your project calculation may be, you may not be using that combination of factor of production which you should be using, because deliberately rate of interest कम होने की वजह से आपने capital ज़्यादा यूज़ कर लिया और labor कम यूज़ कर लिया. That means you produce that product by using capital intensive technology, whereas ideally you should have been using labor intensive technology. So what is the importance of that shadow price? The importance of that shadow price is to overcome that type of distortion. Resource allocation है, which resource you should be using more, which resource you should be using less. The factor of production which is expensive, it should be used less. The factor of production which is cheaper, it should be used more. But cheaper or expensive पता कैसे चलता है? From market price. But is market price the true price? It is not the true price in the underdeveloped countries. Therefore we use the concept of shadow price. Next paragraph. The determination of shadow price, the determination of shadow price, the determination of shadow price can be done through, determination of shadow price can be done through general equilibrium, can be done through general equilibrium or partial equilibrium analysis. General equilibrium or partial equilibrium analysis. Full stop. In the general equilibrium method, in the general equilibrium method, in the general equilibrium method, equilibrium is established, equilibrium is established among all factors. Equilibrium is established among all factors, among all factors by taking their final demand and supply, by taking their final demand and supply, by taking their final demand and supply. On the other end, according to partial equilibrium method, according to partial equilibrium method, according to partial equilibrium method, the shadow prices of capital, labor and foreign exchange, capital, labor and foreign exchange are determined separately, are determined separately. As you know, when you determine any price determination can be in a general equilibrium model or it can be in a partial equilibrium model. But when we say general equilibrium, it means जनरल इक्विलिब्रियम नॉर्मली जैसे जनरल इक्विलिब्रियम का फॉर्म क्या होता था, 2/2/2 मॉडल या पढ़ते थे वेलफेयर में. सो 2 फैक्टर ऑफ प्रोडक्शन यूज टू प्रोड्यूस 2 गुड्स and these 2 goods are distributed between 2 persons. So here we are referring to various factor of production, labor as well as capital. So when I say general equilibrium, it means there must be equilibrium in labor market as well as in the capital market together. And when I say partial equilibrium, it is only labor market keeping capital market situation constant. So we are referring to only one market. So when we use the concept of ceteris paribus or keeping all other factor constant, then the analysis becomes partial equilibrium. So prices can be determined in a general equilibrium method as well as by the partial equilibrium method. But in partial equilibrium method, you determine the price of labor alone, ignoring or keeping capital constant. We are determining only one market, keeping the other market condition constant. But when we include the interrelationship between labor and capital, we take into account the labor demand and labor supply. At the same time, we take into account the capital demand and capital supply, and then we say that both markets equilibrium simultaneously. Then it is basically a general equilibrium matter. So shadow prices can be determined by following general equilibrium method, or it could be determined by following partial equilibrium method. नेक्स्ट पैराग्राफ में तो अकाउंटिंग प्रैक्टिस वगैरह नहीं करना, हाउ इट कैन बी डिटरमाइन, सिंपली आपने लिखा है कि जनरल शैडो प्राइसेस कैन बी डिटरमाइन बाय टू डिफरेंट अप्रोच. नेक्स्ट पैराग्राफ. Determination of shadow price, determination of shadow price, determination of shadow price is difficult. Determination of shadow price is difficult due to following reasons. Is difficult due to following reasons. Is difficult due to following reasons. First, the calculation of shadow prices, the calculation of shadow prices, calculation of shadow prices is based on the assumption that data is available. Data is available, but adequate data are not easily available. But adequate data are not easily available. Adequate data are not easily available in less developed countries. In less developed countries. It basically means that we will come to know that at what wage labor demand and supply are actually equal. We can have information about the government determined wage, that data is available, but how we will come to know at what wage demand and supply will become equal? Intrinsic value तो वो नहीं है. Similarly, at what rate of interest demand and supply of capital will be equal? So such data are lacking, and because of that it is very difficult to determine shadow price. Second problem, in order to establish the intrinsic value of factor of product requires the existence of full equilibrium in all markets. Full equilibrium in all markets. Full stop. In an underdeveloped economy, in an underdeveloped economy characterized by fundamental disequilibrium, after comma the knowledge of full equilibrium condition, for the entire economy is not possible. Third, the assumption of full employment equilibrium, in the whole economy makes the concept of shadow price indeterminate. The assumption of full employment equilibrium in the whole economy makes the concept of shadow price indeterminate. So if you don't know the full equilibrium condition for the entire economy, we do not know the shadow price. So in that way it is indeterminate. Fourth, another difficulty arises with regard to time dimension. Suppose you may calculate a shadow price for one particular year, but that is a static price. Over a period of time that price will change. Before evaluating a project, you come to a particular shadow price. Based upon that shadow price you did your calculations, but that project will run over a period, 4-year period or 5-year period. In that period the price will change, so again the outcome will become imperfect. Fifth, another practical difficulty that arises is that of using shadow price in the economy, using shadow price in the economy where private enterprise buy inputs and sell outputs at market price. On the other end, government uses shadow price. For the evaluation of projects, evaluation of its project, but buys all inputs at market price, and sell output and sell output at competitive market price, and sell output at competitive market price. So remember, there are certain practical difficulties in using that shadow price. So there, the meaning of that shadow price, it basically reflects the intrinsic and true value. Just in one line you can say it reflects the intrinsic and true value of all factor of production. And why we require that shadow price in developing countries particularly? Because the prices which exist do not reflect the true scarcity, true value को reflect नहीं कर रहा है, and because of that you must use the shadow price. And the shadow price can be determined in a general electron method or in a partial electron method, and then there are certain problems as well. The question in the current year question was, you can read that first question. What are shadow prices? So that first part is basically all about your meaning as well as you can say the utility part. Utility part can be further explained here. Why are these preferred over market price in the project evaluation? Because obviously in project evaluation, if we are using the current market prices, then current market prices do not reflect the intrinsic and true value of that factor of production. So for reflecting the intrinsic and true value, we are using that shadow price. So the concept of shadow price has to be explained and the rationale to be explained. If you want to add, you can add the difficulty part as well. ठीक है, आई थिंक कंपल्सरी क्वेश्चन में था शायद शैडो प्राइस वाला. तो सच टाइप ऑफ क्वेश्चन बेसिकली इफ यू हैव दैट इंफॉर्मेशन, अगर आपने पहले पढ़ रखा है फिर तो ठीक है, बट पॉइंट इज स्कोप ग्रोथ एंड डेवलपमेंट में ऑब्वियसली ग्रोथ एंड डेवलपमेंट वाले सेक्शन का क्वेश्चन है, बट नॉट एनी पर्टिकुलर स्पेसिफिक ग्रोथ मॉडल, जस्ट प्रोजेक्ट इवेल्युएशन टेक्निक है ये. गवर्नमेंट प्रोजेक्ट इवेल्युएशन टेक्निक में शैडो प्राइस का यूज़ करते हैं. So you can read that chapter if you want. It is chapter number 53 in ML Jingan. ठीक है.
So but actually there is no use of shadow price because we are paying the market price only when the project is being
But
done.
बैक-हैंड कैलकुलेशन होता है.
Calculations.
Reason being, suppose you take a project, but if you are taking that project and borrowing that capital at a low rate of interest, so you must be aware that in future, right now you are borrowing at the government determined rate of interest. In future, if government deregulate that, then I have to buy it at a higher price. So you must be aware that your shadow price is higher than the current price, or your shadow price is lower than the current price. तो उसका importance है, because that should be kept into mind while taking any project. Because why any project becomes viable or unviable or inefficient? सारे प्रोजेक्ट सक्सेसफुल तो नहीं होते, बट अगर प्रोजेक्ट फेल होता है या इनएफिशिएंट हो जाता है, अनवाइबल हो जाता है, बिकॉज ऑफ द फैक्ट दैट यू मेड अ प्रोजेक्ट इवैल्यूएशन इन द ईयर 2019 based upon the prices prevailing in 2019. You started a project, but that project will take, let us say, 5 years to complete. Now over a period of time, what will change? Over a period of time, that wage can change, rate of interest can change, the price of or the exchange rate can change. So there are always a risk involved. Therefore it is not, economic concept say that at what price you are buying, that is true, but you must be aware at least that if market would have been competitive, then price of the same factor of production would be higher or lower. That means you must know the direction in which it will change at least, because economy over a period of time will become more and more competitive. It happens in all the economy will become more and more competitive, so the rate of interest and the wage will always tend to move towards market equilibrium. But at least direction तो मालूम होगा कि in future rate of interest बढ़ेगा या in future wage reduce होगा. So that is the basically utility of this concept.
शैडो प्राइस में सर रियल प्राइस होगा।
रियल प्राइस हो जाएगा।